Hi, this is Dr. Nora Haenn, and we're back and talking about climate change's impacts on smallholding farmers.
And this is Dr. Elisa Cruz. While I was doing research in El Salvador, I surveyed 126 farmers, both male and female, and I asked them what were the biggest challenges they faced when it came to improving their yields and feeding their families. For both questions, farmers said the number one challenge they faced was erratic weather and not knowing when the rains would start or whether it would rain enough. So variability in rainfall affects plants in many other ways, because rainfall affects temperature, soil health, and the prevalence of plant diseases and pests.
But this isn't the only way climate change is changing things for smallholder farmers. Researchers project that major storms and other severe weather events will increase with climate change. All of these factors add up to something new in human history. And while migration itself has always been a part of the human story, as we heard before, climate-related migration as we're seeing it today is a new and particular kind of migration.
And that gets us to our second point. What's new about climate change today is the way climate change has a multiplier effect. That means that climate change can exacerbate other problems going on in people's lives. You'll remember that smallholder farmers tend to be cash poor, which means that they have a narrow range of options to respond to any crisis situation. Well, climate change can worsen crisis situations.
Angel, I know you have lots of stories from your research in El Salvador, and I'm remembering that you were telling me about one of Ricardo's neighbors who really hit a crisis situation. I'm remembering he had to take care of his epileptic sister after his parents passed away.
Yes, you're talking about Manuel. Manuel is another farmer that I worked with, and he lived in a rural village of about 30 families. As a boy, Manuel learned to farm from his father while going to school. Like many others, Manuel never studied beyond middle school, and he started his own farm operations around 16. He was lucky to inherit 5 acres of land in a place where most people rent or borrow land. Like others in his community, Manuel farmed corn, beans, and some coffee. But then a severe drought hit in 2013, and then another drought in 2014. After 2 failed harvests, Manuel was left with no money and few options. He moved to the city to try and find a job. He quickly became employed for $8 a day. $8 a day is a going rate for many jobs. But criminal elements noticed he had some money and demanded he hand over all of his money to them. As a coffee farmer, Manuel's situation was always precarious. But climate change, combined with family needs, a low-paying job, and gang activity pressured him to migrate. Now imagine if a climate change-related storm had damaged his house, or if another financial problem surprised him. And in fact, that sort of thing just happened, although by then, Manuel was already in the United States. In November of 2020, 2 hurricanes hit Central America, back to back, and hundreds of thousands of people lost their homes. And now some of Manuel's former neighbors are climate refugees who are migrating to Mexico and hoping to come to the United States and other places.
Hurricanes and other large-scale events capture headlines. North Carolina State University is home to the North Carolina Climate Office, which estimates a hurricane will make landfall in North Carolina once every 2 years. Overall, the United States experiences about 17 hurricanes each year, and we know the devastating effects a hurricane can have. Now imagine the effects of such storms in a place like El Salvador. It's teeny tiny in comparison to North Carolina. El Salvador is just 1/6 the size of North Carolina, and you could fit the whole country into North Carolina's coastal plain.
Because it's so tiny, the storms have an outsized effect. But climate change can also operate in the background of people's lives, making it hard to recognize people as climate refugees. So someone like Manuel may appear to be migrating, say looking for a job or just to be with his family. But if we follow their trails back home and look into a little bit of history, we find that at the root they were displaced by climate change.
And that brings us to our third point. People first look close to home to respond to climate change. You'll remember Angel said that when her friend Manuel first left farming, he looked for a job inside El Salvador. Here again, Manuel's case is typical. International migration is rarely anybody's first response to climate change. In El Salvador, for every person who migrates internationally, 2 people migrate internally, that is, inside the country. The vast majority of people in places like El Salvador do not migrate internationally, and they won't do so in the future. That's because most people's social networks, that's their family, their friends, their job connections, and so on, people's social networks are local. And that means their opportunities are also local. When climate change becomes a problem and people turn to the options available to them, most of their options are located inside their home country. And so a lot of their options depend on where they have family or friends and who can help them with housing and contacts to get a job and get on with their lives.
From my experience in El Salvador, people tend to move to the capital city of San Salvador or another large city where they might be able to find more jobs. Again, the exact location where they choose depends on where they have connections or family or friends. And this brings us to our next point. Climate-related migration builds on long-standing migratory ties. Thus, geography matters because not all places on the planet are equally connected to all other places.
For example, the Mexican smallholding farmers that I work with, they wouldn't even think to travel to El Salvador to address their climate problems because they really just don't have any history with El Salvador.
The United States has special relationships with countries like Mexico and Central America. So to the extent that people from these regions migrate to the United States, they are building on these ties. For example, researchers can trace the roots of today's migration from El Salvador all the way back to the 1980s, more than 40 years ago. At the time, El Salvador was undergoing a civil war in which the U.S. government supported the Salvadoran government. Approximately 500,000 Salvadorans fled to the United States to escape violence in the 1980s.
There's lots we could say on the historical ties between Mexico, Central American countries, and the United States, and maybe you'll take a history class on this material. But just to be brief for now, given all these historical connections, international migration is already an option for the smallholder farmers that Dr. Cruz and I work with because many have family or friends who emigrated to the United States in the past.
Climate-related migration builds on U.S. policies that were put into place decades ago. And in responding to climate-related migration, U.S. policy can learn from these lessons. Some policies that are being talked about include addressing some of those multiplier effects that we mentioned earlier. If climate-related migrations occur in conjunction with poverty, then the U.S. might enact anti-poverty measures, such as supporting higher coffee prices. Given the legacy of violence left by El Salvador's civil war, the U.S. might also support peacemaking efforts of the sort that have been effective in the past.
Mexico is the place I know best, and it's a wealthier country than El Salvador. So Mexico offers people more opportunities to respond to climate migration by staying inside the country. In fact, in recent years, migration from Mexico to the United States has been at net zero. In other words, the number of people entering the United States from Mexico equals the number of people returning to that country. Still, some Mexicans are clearly willing to travel to the United States to work temporarily, and in response to this, Mexico and the United States could enact a joint immigration policy that makes this coming and going more transparent. Angel, let's go back to Ricardo, who we heard from earlier. Has he thought about migrating to the United States?
Well, let's hear what he has to say for himself.
Sí, el tema de la inmigración es grande.
Yes, the issue of immigration is a big one. The idea of going to another country, to imagine living in the United States, in Canada, in Italy, anywhere in the world, that comes from the lack of conditions to prosper here in El Salvador.
En el aspecto económico.
And I mean prosper in the economic sense. Maybe it is possible to have good academic conditions. That's true. But it doesn't mean you will have a job with a decent salary or move ahead. Besides, many people also migrate due to insecurity, because that's another big issue. Some communities are dangerous, and people experience attacks. There are places where you have to be careful with everything you say. The problem of delinquency forces whole families to migrate, because if they stay, the entire family faces extinction. And when people say this is a safe country, that's a lie. People still go missing. There are no massacres. But recently, it was revealed that a police officer had buried several corpses in his backyard. That doesn't make a safe place. How can we feel safe in our country? And the economy too, because the economy is the most important thing in life. If I have a chance to earn good money, I will have enough to survive and feed my family. So that is why many people migrate, to look for another way to live.
He sounds very emotional about the topic.
I think because he is. He has lost a lot of family members and friends to migration. He dreams of seeing those people again, and he also dreams of earning enough money to build a brick house that can withstand a hurricane. Unfortunately, Ricardo earns a little more than those coffee growers we heard about earlier, but he still lives in a precarious economic situation. He earns around $3,000 a year, but his house has a dirt floor, and the walls are made of corrugated zinc that could easily be blown away in a hurricane. But he can't afford anything else.
One of my dreams, and I remember it well, I was 16 years old, and my aunt offered me the chance to go to the United States, and I was excited. I wanted to go there, but sometimes God gives you an opportunity, and He makes you reconsider. I did not go to the United States, but thank God I have my family. And when you have kids, you have to focus on raising them. You cannot abandon them like many people do. That is why we see many children, young kids, who get lost because they lack care, affection, the love of a father and a mother. And so they take a different path. So I want to take care of my children. And in spite of this crisis and difficulties, I want them to succeed. I know I would be happy and fortunate to see my daughter being successful, rather than failing in life. That is why I haven't left them and gone to another country, because I know they will be left on their own, adrift and unprotected. If I stay, at least they will feel their father's love. But if I leave them, they could take a different path. They will think differently.
He sounds like a very devoted father.
He is. But what he doesn't say directly is that he does think about coming to the United States. And I think he thinks about it all the time. But he wants to stay with his family, and he's working super hard to improve the situation for him and his family in El Salvador. But who knows what the future holds? Another hurricane, drought, or a family illness could force him to migrate. But he does have one more thing to say to everyone at North Carolina State.
Bueno, invitarles. A mí me gustaría por lo menos
Well, I would like to invite you.
al menos un hermanamiento.
It would be nice that my community could have at least some kind of friendship with a group of people who want to know about
Y
us
también
and also learn about our needs,
algunas necesidades también.
because
¿verdad? Porque
nobody
a veces
has
uno-
everything they need in life.
Y el día que decidan venir algún grupo de jóvenes, pues
And the day a group of young people decides they want to come to my community, they will be welcome and have a place to stay in Santa Maria el Banco. We are waiting for you.